Med allt nytt i ton och kommer här Radio Nord. Lyssna. För ert nöje är den gjord, därför hör på Radio Nord. Lyssna. Dygnet runt i bjuder är det bästa. Den musik som gillas av de flesta. Så välkommen.
You think that's just bye-bye blackbirds in a foreign language, you're missing a big international adventure story. That song happens to be the battle hymn of a real-life pirate, and he's across the microphone tonight, and I've been hungering for 3 years to tell his story out loud over the air, and we'll get underway right after I tell you about a real-life fashion hero who can put you in just the right fur, easily, elegantly, and inexpensively. The latest headline in furs is one of the happiest. You can get your own raincoat or cloth coat fur-lined by Harry True, personally. And this costs less than you'd expect. And you'll wind up with a finer garment than you'd expect because Harry True is a much better furrier than anybody has a right to expect. Don't come with your cash. Come with your questions. Tonight. Call now or later or tomorrow, Lackawanna 46787, and discuss your fur-lined raincoat or fur-lined cloth coat or any other fur problem you have. Harry True has made his reputation for 33 years by turning fur problems into fur opportunities. So if you're thinking of a new fur coat, a reconditioned fur, a revitalized fur, or one of the new fur-lined raincoats or cloth coats, call Harry True now, Lackawanna 46787, and experience a relationship not with a fur salesman, but with a fur statesman. Lackawanna 46787, and Harry True is located at 352 7th Avenue. See Lawrence, the most honored picture of all, Lawrence of Arabia, now at popular prices and continuous performances, and Lawrence starts tomorrow at a theater near you. I've said a lot of nice things about Sweden over these microphones, not just because my wife Ulla was born there, but because it's such a downright decent country, full of beautiful, peaceful, decent people. However, every country, however decent, deserves a good kick in the conscience every now and then, and I'm afraid it's Sweden's turn tonight. The man across the microphone is a man who's been branded a pirate by the Swedish government. He's Jack Kotschack, and he had a pirate ship all right, but it flew, not the skull and crossbones, it flew a radio transmitter powerful enough to enrapture the Swedish people and infuriate the Swedish government. This really isn't a bitter story. I think it's a broadcasting, business, adventure story. And a little bit later on, I want Jack Kotschack to tell another adventure story that he lived that wasn't as happy as the one we're going to tell first. I left a gruesome riddle hanging at the end of last night's program. I said there was one battlefront in World War II where Jews and Nazi Germans fought side by side as allies. The story is, I think, the most grotesque curiosity of the whole war. And Jack Kotschack lived on that battlefront, and I wonder how many listeners can guess which battlefront that was. First, I want to bring the taste of the Baltic Sea back to pirate Jack Kotschack. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what got the Swedish government so angry.
Var morgon kommer glada toner från Radio Nord och hela dagen bjuds underhållning från Radio Nord. På kvällen kommer dansmusiken från Radio Nord. Ja, hela dygnet finns musik på Radio Nord.
That was the voice of Sweden's pirate radio transmitter, Radio Nord, commanded by my guest, Mr. Jack Kotschack from Stockholm. Mr. Kotschack, once upon a time you were a movie producer.
That's correct. I used to produce movies, but I gave it up when I started this radio business.
Well, what made you switch from production to piracy?
Well, I found this radio business so exciting that I couldn't find more exciting things to do, so I stopped everything to become a pirate on the Baltic Sea.
Now let me set the scene. Sweden is a beautiful country, a free country They have freedom of religion. They have freedom of speech. They have more political parties than America ever thought about having. They have freedom of everything except radio. The government controls the radio, and there's just one station. Of course, there are more than one.
Well, I don't think you're quite right, Barry. It's freedom is a very large word. I think this country has freedom, but Sweden is ruled by a socialist government today.
Right, but I want to dramatize that Sweden calls itself socialist, but, you know, the communist countries call themselves socialist, too, and I want to dramatize at the beginning.
I'm sorry, I could say that Sweden is calls himself a democratic country where free enterprise and freedom in business should be given, but I don't think that the way the Swedish government treated Radio Nord proves that there is no freedom. It's political questions and political parties who rules the government.
Right, Mr. Kotschack, but what I want to dramatize at first is that we're not talking about Czechoslovakia or Hungary or Bulgaria or Russia.
No, that's
Sweden
correct.
is a free country compared to those countries.
Oh, yes, that's correct.
And a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear that one Swede thinks that Sweden is not free, and you happen to be that Swede, and I want to get into that story tonight. When did you try to go into the radio business?
Well, I tried I started 1960. I met a friend, and we discussed it, and I suddenly got the idea to put a radio ship on there, but before we got on the air, it was the 12th of March, 1961, so it took me a year and a half to get on the air.
So you couldn't put a radio station on shore, so you bought a ship
That's
and
right.
put a transmitter on it.
That's right.
Which flag did you fly?
We flew a Nicaraguan flag.
Nicaraguan flag.
Yes.
And you were 4 miles off the coast of Sweden.
Yes, it's 4 miles in Sweden. It's generally 3 miles, but the Scandinavian countries has a law, 4 miles.
And you started broadcasting free enterprise radio with commercials into a country that had never had it before.
That's right.
How did you operate? Did you have your whole studio on the ship?
No, we had a studio in town, and we produced everything. We produced everything in town except news, and we had 4 hours live show from the boat, disc jockey shows, where the newsmen were disc jockeys.
I've seen the pictures of Radio Nord, and you actually took the tapes that you produced ashore in Stockholm.
Yes.
And you packed them into a capsule, a floating capsule.
Yes.
And you took a little airplane.
Yes.
And every day that airplane took off from Radio Nord's airstrip right
That's
outside
right.
Stockholm and
That's right.
flew over your ship. What was the name of the ship?
Bonjour.
The Bonjour. And you dropped this little tank full of tapes
Tapes.
right beside the ship.
Correct.
And they came out in a little rowboat and picked up that tank, and they were in business.
No, that's not right. They didn't have to go out with a rowing boat at all. They dropped the tank, had a line, and it was thrown out over a buoy who had another line, and it was pulled up to the ship. It's something I saw in a film many years ago. It was practiced in the desert, and I thought it could just as well be practiced on the waters, and it proved to be very successful.
All right, so the boys on the ship took this tank, and they pulled out tapes and newspapers and letters from home and herring sandwiches.
No sandwiches. The only ones when the boys in the studio tried to kid with the boys on the boat, they put a cake in it, a cream cake, but the drop, like we call it, was so successful that the cake didn't get any damage.
Did you ever lose a tank full of tapes?
Yes, once.
Well, how did you stay on the air for that day?
Well, we went live. We had enough records and tape on the ship, but we naturally missed the last commercials.
Is it true the first message from your pirate radio ship was an SOS?
That's correct. We didn't have any telephone on the ship at that time because the Norwegian government refused to deliver a telephone to the ship when it was equipped in Copenhagen. The Danes didn't have any telephones to deliver, so we went out on the high seas and there was no telephone, and a big storm, not the biggest, but a big storm made the captain to make an SOS signal by a lamp. However, he was a little nervous, our first captain, because the lightship, who was not far away, didn't afterwards consider it such a big danger.
Did you play much American popular music?
Oh yes, quite a lot.
Which American artists were the most popular with Swedish listeners?
Well, I would say it was Elvis Presley.
Now, Sweden's supposed to be one of the freest countries in the world.
That's right.
Why did they fight you?
Well, like I said in the beginning, I mean, what I mean was freedom. I mean, freedom in business is a large word, and I mean, there are so many rules and regulation in Sweden, so that, first of all, commercial radio wasn't allowed. Secondly, if we wouldn't have been very successful, I don't think the government would have cared, but since we got 96% of all listeners, they suddenly decided they was going to stop us.
Jack, how do you know the Swedish people approved of Radio Nord? You were a pirate, no question about that.
Sure, I admit that. I mean, it was a fascinating thing to be a pirate.
Of course, for a long time you were a legal pirate. They had no law to stop you. They had to invent laws they had to ad-lib laws as they went along.
That's correct.
And that, I think, is Sweden's shame in the story here, because you know, we like law in this country. We're fascinated by law. One of the biggest books was Louis Nazar's My Day in Court. It's now a play on Broadway. Yes. Americans are sort of mesmerized by law, and that's something that we're a little bit proud of.
Well, that's correct, Barry. I wouldn't have mind if there would have been a law, but I don't like the way it was enforced since our mail was 2,000 letters a day, and we had, when they were going to force the law, there was 300,000 people who wrote their name on a newspaper list who was published every day during 2 weeks.
You mean there was a newspaper poll?
It was one newspaper who was for us completely. That was Expressen, a Swedish newspaper, and they had a list where you could sign your name and send it in to the newspaper, and there was 310,000 names given to the communication minister for Radio Nord.
The first time I ever heard Radio Nord was in a Swedish hotel, and the government owned that hotel, but yet they had Radio Nord over the house radio service.
Every hospital, government-owned, had it on the central radio, so the patients were listening all day long on Radio Nord.
Did you ever get fan mail from behind the Iron Curtain? Because there in the Baltic Sea, you know, you could be listened to in Latvia and Lithuania.
Oh yes. So we had even Swedish letters from Latvia, Estonia, and from Leningrad, as I remember.
I have a Polish magazine in front of me, and they have a big article on the ship, so you must have had listeners in Poland.
Yes, there came some Polish journalists came to the station, and I wasn't in at that time, and they were taken to the ship, and they made a story out of this.
Did any top government officials stand up in the Swedish parliament and say, I like Jack Kotschack, and I like Radio Nord, I like free enterprise in the Swedish air?
Oh yes. The opposing party, as you know, Sweden has several parties, but the right wing, Mr. Heckscher, he was very much for Radio Nord, and he got up in the parliament and he said, I even have considered to have my party advertise on Radio Nord. And the Folkpartiet, which People's Party, yes, they had a lawyer who fought a strong battle for Radio Nord. By the way, she was also in the what we call the Supreme Council of Sweden, where they voted not to stop Radio Nord. However, the Socialist Party got the law. They ruled the government, or they forced the laws through.
That's the fascinating, for a broadcaster, the whole story is fascinating. For a lawyer, that's what's fascinating. A government as solid and as democratic as Sweden's government made up the laws as they went along to knock you off the air. No. And for anybody who's interested in any kind of democracy, I think your story is fascinating because it's an example of what happens when one free enterpriser bloodies his nose against a state that isn't going to let him happen.
That's right. We could say it this way, that it was actually the Communist, the Center Party, and the Socialist Party who forced the law against Radio Nord. The liberal parties who believe in free enterprise and who oppose the way the government ruled the country very strongly, they were very much against it, and they really fought a battle. They had 14 hours discussion in the parliament before the law was passed.
How many motions did they have to pass to kill you?
Well, this was going on for 1 year to get this law in the right shape. They had about 16 or 17 meetings, I can't remember exactly, before they had meetings in Finland by the radio chiefs, naturally they're employed by the government, and they had meetings in Oslo, Copenhagen, Helsinki, and so forth, until after over 1 year's discussion, they got the law the way they wanted.
Jack, in a minute, I want to know how the Swedish government finally silenced your pirate ship and what Sweden said about it after they succeeded. And then I want to hear some Swedish commercials, and I want you to take us back to the one battlefield in World War II where Jews and Nazis fought together as allies. First, if you own common stocks, hear this statement from Standard & Poor's, respected supplier of investment information to brokers, bankers, and individual investors. Standard & Poor's believes some common stocks should be sold now, sell overinflated speculative stocks, sell stocks with less than average promise, sell stocks that may never come back, and sell them now. A list of such stocks, 68 stocks that Standard & Poor's feels should be sold immediately. Companies with dwindling profit prospects will soon be handed to Standard & Poor's subscribers. If you'd like to check this list promptly, you may own some of these stocks. Answer now. You can get this list of 68 stocks to sell now with a 3-month subscription to Standard & Poor's investment advisory service, the weekly Outlook, for only $18, and that's tax deductible. Send no money, you'll be billed later. Write stocks, care of Barry Farber, WOR, New York 18, or phone now or later, Murray Hill 7, 9000. That's Murray Hill 7, 9000. Out-of-town listeners, call collect. You don't have to wait until spring to save money on snow tires. You can save money right now at the start of the snow tire season with tremendous cash reductions on big, brawny, brand new General snow tires with credit terms you like. 2 new General snow tires cost as little as $26, only $5 down, months to pay the balance, no trade is needed, and you get a full 15-month road hazard guarantee, plus that famous General Tire promise, you go in snow or we pay the tow. Wait till next spring, but it's guaranteed you won't get any lower prices if you wait than General's offering right now. See your General Tire dealer now. The first snow could be here before the week is out. This is WOR AM and WOR FM, your RKO General station in New York, and I'm Barry Farber. And across the mic is the man who made Sweden declare war for the first time in over 100 years. He's a 20th century pirate, not Captain Kidd, but Captain Kotschack, Jack Kotschack of Stockholm, who hit the peace-loving Swedes with commercials, pouring in from 4 miles out in the Baltic Sea. I visited Jack Kotschack's station in Stockholm last year, and of all the offices and organizations and military units I've ever seen in action, Jack Kotschack's staff of Radio Nord had the most fight, the most fun, the most esprit. And you can't imagine what the Radio Nord adventure did for Mr. Kotschack in Sweden. Just mention that name, Jack Kotschack, in Sweden, and you'll discover that he's considered the General MacArthur of Sweden, the Boris Pasternak of Sweden, and the Martin Luther King of Sweden, all because he challenged the government and won the people right out from under it. We just did a station break for WOR in English. Let's hear what a Radio Nord station break sounded like in Swedish.
Radio Nord, Radio Nord, Radio Nord, stationen som gärna tar ton.
Jack, did Radio Nord interfere with other radio stations in the Northlands? Was that one of the government's arguments?
It was one of the government's arguments, but it didn't interfere with anybody. It was on the same frequency as Nicosia, Cyprus Broadcasting Corporation in Cyprus, who had 2 kilowatt and didn't reach farther than Mediterranean. And it had the same frequency as Lyon.
In France?
In France, who is a station just for Lyon. So it didn't interfere with anybody. That's why all these government arguments that it was the international tele-union and so forth, that they shouldn't disturb other stations, were incorrect.
Jack, it's sometimes hard to get sponsors in this country when you can prove your radio station is legal. Did you have much trouble getting sponsors for a pirate radio station?
Well, we didn't have any trouble in the beginning, but the minute the communication minister, Skoglund, opened his mouth and said that this is illegal and so forth, that's when the sponsor got scared. I mean, we had many American companies on the station. We had, for instance, our first sponsor was Westinghouse, which also was the last one. We had several other ones who stayed right from the beginning to the end. Lever Brothers had big programs, and many big Swedish firms were on the air right from the beginning. But we lost several sponsors when every time the communication minister opened his mouth.
How long has the present Swedish government been in power?
Oh, there'll be, I think it's 14 years.
Now, if they had had an election right after they shut down Radio Nord, do you think that the people's anger would have changed the election and thrown that government out of power?
Well, it's hard to say, Barry, but let me put it another way and say this way. I had forbidden politics and religion on the station, but if we would have gone into politics and we would have really sponsored one party, I think that party would have had big chances to get into power.
Were you ever tempted to do that?
Oh, yes, several times, but I tried to keep my line, which I said right from the beginning. I can tell you in this respect that we were never allowed to advertise in the papers, so we could never make any ads in the paper. That was forbidden by government-ruled Tidningsutgivarföreningen, which means the Association for the Press, so-called free press. When we were supposed to start, we sent out 2,000 telegrams to prominent people to put on the radio. Unfortunately, our transmitter didn't work at that time, so 2,000 people were Christmas Eve trying to get in Radio Nord, and I think these 2,000 people were very hungry because they sat a long time trying to get it.
In a minute, I want to hear some Swedish commercials from your pirate radio ship. But first, let me do a legal commercial for what I consider the most irresistible magazine offer ever broadcast.
I'm glad you have
to
some
Americans.
legal. I'm very glad that this is a country where you still can have legal commercials.
All right, here comes one now. Phone or write today for 16 months, 16 issues, only $2 to new subscribers of McCall's. Your 16 issues of McCall's will bring you dazzling entertainment, the biggest bargain in McCall's history, the most talked about, best-selling books, more than 50 short stories, visits monthly with world-famous men and women, hundreds of stunning, lavish, big-picture color pages, all the latest in foods, fashions, decorating, medicine, family relations, hundreds of other features. All this, 16 months of McCall's for only $2. That's 12.5 cents a month, and that's half the annual price per copy. Order now because this offer absolutely expires October the 27th. Write McCall's, care of Barry Farber, WOR, New York 18, or phone now Murray Hill 2, 6800. Don't send money, you'll be billed later. Phone Murray Hill 2, 6800, or write McCall's, care of Barry Farber, WOR, New York 18, New York. We're spending the night with a freedom fighter against one of the freest governments in the world. I've never heard anybody criticize Sweden's government for not being free. And Jack Kotschack is probably the first man who is able to come to America and do that because he lived it. He's officially a pirate in the eyes of Sweden, and he's the most capricious and courageous pirate ever to sail the Swedish main. He anchored a ship with a transmitter 4 miles off the Swedish coast, and he gave Sweden the kind of broadcasting that Americans can enjoy at 40 or 50 different points on the dial any day or night. Jack, do I have your permission to play a few commercials?
I'll be delighted.
Ordinarily, this would be illegal, but since nobody can understand, it'll sound like music.
Well, I think there's still some Swedes in this country who understand it. I'd be delighted if you would play them.
All right, I'll tell you what, let's let the people try to guess what products are being advertised, and anybody who guesses ought to get a couple of cases free.
That's a good idea. I'll send them from Sweden.
Okay, come in Radio Nord.
Toy frisk,
Känner du det när som du tar en toy?
toy lugn,
Blir man alltid var gång man tar en toy? Kör du bil eller bär iväg på en motorhoj? Kopplar du bestav och blir lugn om du tuggar på toy?
Ha alltid ett paket Toy till hands, i fickan, i väskan eller i bilen. Toy tuggummi ger er en frisk andedräkt.
toy frisk, toy lugn, tugga toy.
Jack Kotschack, what's the product?
Well, that was chewing gum.
Was that a big sponsor?
Yes, that was quite a big sponsor. Swedish manufacturer, the biggest Swedish manufacturer of chewing gum.
And they weren't afraid of the government?
Well, I wouldn't say so. I mean, they were a big sponsor in the beginning, but they were scared of this special commercial. I mean, they didn't have the guts to stay on.
All right, let's hear another Swedish commercial.
Alla glada fötter gå till skoman.
Skoman,
På god fot, alltid stå med skoman.
skoman,
Skoman har skor för far och som mor, syster och bror, ja många fler än ni tror.
Skoman, Hamngatan eller Sergels torg har skon just för er. Ni är alltid välkommen till Skoman.
skoer,
Ja skoer,
ja skoer hos skoman.
Very gentle and lyrical. It makes me want to go out and buy, but I don't know exactly what.
Well, this was a retailer. He sells shoes. He
In Stockholm.
In Stockholm, and he was a small sponsor, but he was very successful. He opened a new shop, and this was the commercial he used.
Let's hear another mystery sponsor from the pirate ship, Radio Nord, 4 miles in the Baltic Sea off the coast of Stockholm, Sweden.
Toska läppstift, trollspöt som förvandlar dina läppar till en dröm. Toska läppstift,
Är den moderna kvinnans ljuva hemlighet.
Toska läppstift, skänker ju din mun en lyster vacker och så varm.
Toska läppstift finns i lysande vackra nyanser.
Trollspöt som förvandlar, förskönar dina läppar. Toska.
Läppstiftet på allas läppar.
Now, that was sort of a suggestive commercial. Did it have something to do with beauty or cosmetics?
Well, it was very suggestive. I mean, women's lips are always suggestive. That was for lipstick.
Jack, do you remember the night that the government let the axe fall and finally invented the law they needed to knock you out?
Well, I remember that night, but I think the worst time was how they tried to prevent us from going on the air. They tried very hard, and they never believed that we could go on the air. I know, and I haven't got it with me, I was going to say in my hands, but I have in my office back in Stockholm a summary of a meeting they had, and they said that it was impossible to go on the air on a small ship like this with a high mast and be on the frequency which we used, 606 kc. That was the technical part of it. However, the worst thing was that when we bought this ship in Germany, it was an old freighter, and we started rebuilding it, and suddenly the yard got protests from the German government and saying that you can't equip the ship here. There is an old law, an old Nazi law from 1937.
You mean the Swedish government used an old Nazi law to keep you...
Well, no, the German government used an old Nazi law against the shipyard in Germany, so they wouldn't equip the ship. And what I found out later, that the initiative was taken from the Swedish government to try to get the Germans to stop our ship from being equipped.
Jack, after it's all over, incidentally, did you lose much money in Radio Nord?
Well, no, I broke even, I could say.
Are you sorry you did it?
No, I would do it again, anytime, but now I would do it how to start off better. It wouldn't take me 14 months to get on the air, or 13 months. I could do it in a month.
Jack, if you had succeeded, would it have been a good thing for the world? I mean, might we not see pirate ships 3 miles off the coast of New York City broadcasting on anybody's wavelength?
No, I don't think so, because in countries where there are free enterprise and where they permit legal radio, I don't think it's necessary at all. There wouldn't be any pirate ships. But there is a pirate ship, or there are actually 2 pirate ships in existence, one on AM and one on FM, who came after we started, and they're still on the air.
I think they're still on the air because the Swedish government in Stockholm can't hear them, so they don't feel them.
Well, that's correct. One is Radio Veronica outside Holland. It's a 2 kilowatt transmitter.
Oh, I thought you meant 2 off the coast of Sweden.
No. It's outside Holland. And there's one outside the south coast of Sweden. It's a small FM transmitter, but the owner of the ship has no sponsor, since the law criminalized sponsor. But she, a woman who owns it, she tries to stay on the air and has an own mail order company, but she has very few listeners because her transmitter is not very strong.
But that was the law that Sweden finally needed. They made criminals out of everybody who bought time, who bought commercials on your station.
That's correct. If, let's say, Westinghouse would have continued, it would have been a criminal firm, or if General Electric or
this little
Ford or this little lipstick company, they are all criminals. So I had about 450 sponsors. If they would have stayed on the air, there would have been 450 criminals, so they would have put to jail. Talking about criminals, newspapers in Sweden, they are now writing, the newspaper who oppose the Swedish government, they're now writing big editorials saying that the Swedish government was so busy stopping Radio Nord that they forgot to take action against a big spy who was just caught in Sweden.
This colonel?
This Colonel Wennerström, because the government knew about him, but they suspected him, let me put it this way, but everybody was so busy trying to stop us that nothing else was important, just stopping a small ship of 450 tons out in the Baltic.
You mean they considered commercials more dangerous than conspiracy?
Well, I think the music might hurt the cultured people, which, as a matter of fact, the Swedish radio, they broadcasted at that time 12 hours a day and had 2,000 employers, and we broadcasted 24 hours a day and had 62.
Jack, I said earlier that you spent World War II on the one battlefront where Jews and Nazi Germans fought side by side. This is not a trick question, it's a grotesque question, but I wonder how many listeners guessed that that battlefront was in Finland.
That's correct. As you know, I came from Finland and moved to Sweden, and now I want to give it a straight answer, because they didn't fight actually side by side. They fought, the German troops were in the north of Finland. There were no Finnish soldiers in the German troops, but they fought verbally by side by side.
Well,
yes.
when I say side by side, I mean just
that's right.
Just like
that's
we
correct,
fought with the British and the French and the Dutch
correct.
and the Free Norwegians and the Free Danes and
That's
so
correct.
on. They were, there were units up and down the Russian front,
That's
and there'd be a
correct.
Finnish unit with Finnish Jews, and their allies. A couple hundred yards away would be the Germans.
Oh, well, 100 yards might be too little, but that's correct. That's right.
Now, how can you explain the coincidence that allowed this to happen?
Well, first of all, we were happy enough in Finland to have a very strong man in Field Marshal Mannerheim, who was very Western. He thought very high of the West, but we fought the same enemy, the Russians. Now, we had in the Finnish army 132 soldiers at the front, and out of them 36 or 38, I don't remember exactly, were killed. Now,
Jewish
soldiers. So Mannerheim was respected the Finnish Jews very much, and Hitler came to his birthday, and I know that Hitler demanded that all Jews should be deported from Finland, but Mannerheim was the one who saved them.
The legend goes that von Ribbentrop himself came to Mannerheim in about 1943 with 3 empty boats and said, "We're here to send Finland's Jews back to concentration camps."
Since I was at the front, I couldn't tell you this, but I know that they deported some Estonian Jews, escaped to Finland, and without the officials and Mannerheim knowing, and the police chief, who were very Nazi-minded, they sent them back to Estonia and they were killed. But no Finnish Jews were deported or killed during the war.
Now, Mannerheim, who was Hitler's ally, a very uncomfortable ally,
yes,
told Hitler, through Ribbentrop, that...
No, he told it himself.
He told Hitler personally?
Sure,
Really?
Hitler came to his birthday, his 70...
In Helsinki?
No, to the front. He came with a plane. Hitler visited to Finland.
And Hitler told Mannerheim that
I don't know if he told it at that time, but I know that definitely that they wanted to deport the Finnish Jews.
And Mannerheim said, "If you lay one hand on any Finn, Jew or otherwise, we will abandon the war."
Well, I don't know if it's abandoned, but
that's the legend.
That might be correct, but he said he would definitely. If he said that he is the man who rules Finland, and I mean he didn't want any mixture politically with Hitler.
Well, Jack, you're Jewish yourself.
Yes, that's right.
You must have felt the irony of that predicament, you being allied with Nazi Germany.
That's correct, and I want to tell you where I felt it most. That was the time when I belonged to what we say in Finnish, sinivalkoinen brigade. It was sent to various fronts, and since I'm pretty tall and pretty strong, I was sent to this brigade too, and there was put together of sportsmen and so forth.
Is that you said the name in Finnish, is that the famous Blue Brigade?
Blue-White Brigade, yes.
And if you talk to a Russian soldier today and mention Blue-White Brigade, he will stand up and say they were the best fighters we fought in World War II.
That I couldn't tell you, but it had quite a reputation. And we were sent up to Salla for 2 months to be in reserve. And at that time, the commander-in-chief asked anyone who could speak German. He knew I could speak German because this was on our card which they had. And they took out 6 boys to be liaison officers between the German and the Finnish troops, and I was one of them.
Jack, did you ever personally have contact with Nazi soldiers in Finland during the war?
Well, I mean, being in the army, you couldn't avoid it. I mean, we discussed a common enemy, and they knew I was Jewish.
Well, how did they react? How did you react?
I react very badly. I couldn't help it, but since I was in the Finnish army, I couldn't help doing my duty.
Did you ever get into a fight with a Nazi soldier?
Yes, I came into a fight when I was on leave, and we were 4 Finnish boys, and there were 4 German officers, and we really had a big fight in a restaurant. I was lucky enough to knock a German captain through a mirror in the restaurant Adlon in Helsinki.
There was one point in the war when Finland turned and started fighting the Germans.
Yes, and that many people don't remember it. The 2 last months in the war, Finland fought Germany and threw them out of the northern Finland. And what's more important to that, they also don't remember that the German troops, they burned down the whole north of Finland.
Jack, 2 major systems of government are competing in the world today.
Yes.
Ours and the Russians.
Yes.
And you make your living right in the middle.
Yes.
In Sweden with the so-called middle way.
Yes.
In a minute, I want to turn you from a pirate into a referee. I want you to try to guess which system most of the world will be living under 100 years from now.
Yes.
Our individually oriented system or their collectivist system. First, if you write or phone Standard & Poor's tonight You'll receive Standard & Poor's list of 68 stocks they feel offer inferior possibilities and should be sold now, plus 82 stocks they believe are exceptionally favorably situated and should be bought now. And you'll also get 3 months of Standard & Poor's investment advisory service, The Outlook. It's yours weekly, 3 full months, only $18, and that's tax deductible. And you'll get 4 other valuable investment tools. Detailed Standard & Poor's printed reports on your stocks and bonds. Standard & Poor's 235-page stock guide. How to invest, revealing Standard & Poor's tested investment principles. And fourth, Standard & Poor's $5.50 investor stock computer. Send no money, you'll be billed later. Just write Stocks, care of Barry Farber, WOR, New York 18, or phone Murray Hill 7-9000. That's Stocks, care of Barry Farber, WOR, New York 18, or phone Murray Hill 7-9000. Out-of-town listeners, call collect.
Listen carefully to this story and see if you can answer one simple question. Ready? Very well. There are 2 men. One lives north of the city. The other lives in town. Both men are executives. Recently, both men bought new cars. One man likes small cars, so he bought a $1,500 compact. The other likes big cars, so he bought a $15,000 limousine. Both men paid cash, but neither took a penny out of the bank. Now the question. What do these men have in common? Of course, they both learned that at Bank of Commerce of New York, you can finance a new car in advance, and no down payment is necessary, and rates are only $4.25 per $100 per year, and you don't even have to come in. Just phone a Bank of Commerce personal credit officer at Murray Hill 2, 5000, anytime between 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m.
There's a branch of the Bank of Commerce at 126 Delancey Street in New York, and that's just one of many in our city. Jack Kotschack, which system do you think will have the upper hand 100 years from now?
Well, I think definitely the individual system. I don't believe in collectivism. I think that every man should be able to work and do what he's worth for.
What brings you to America now, Jack? Is your mission piracy or production?
No, it isn't piracy. I want to start producing television films for the American market in Sweden, and I also have close contact with an American firm called Washmobile. I'm teaching the Swedes how to wash their cars in Sweden now.
Jack, I want to thank you for coming all the way from Stockholm to share this saga. And if Radio Nord ever gets back on the air...
It will get back. Somehow. I don't know how, but it will be back.
That's the title of your book, Radio Nord Will Come Back.
Yeah, and it will be back. And I wrote this book and just because I want to show the people that we will be back.
Well, the book is in Swedish, so I can't advertise it to our listeners, but my mother-in-law read it, and it's the only book I ever saw that made her stand up and holler.
Well, I hope it would be translated into English because it would show how we fought the battle.
Jack, I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Jack Kotschack, the Swedish pirate who attacked Sweden, not with cutlass, but with commercials. He brought commercial radio to Sweden, and the Swedish government had the last word, but Jack Kotschack had the last laugh and the last applause from millions of Swedes who found competition in the airwaves refreshing and rewarding. Don't forget TV Guide. It's the best 15 cents you can spend. And tomorrow night, we'll interrogate the columnist who was singing the same song long before Valachi knew the words or the melody. Vic Rozelle, who knows more about organized crime than anybody else on our side of the law. That's tomorrow night at 8:15. This is Barry Farber. Stay tuned for Ted Malley.